My name is Doreen Katusiime. I am the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Tourism, Wildlife and Antiquities. Now, it is common knowledge that prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the ministry or the sector as tourism was the highest foreign exchange earner for the government of Uganda. Tourism was contributing almost 8% to the GDP, bringing in about $1.6 billion into the economy. Tourist arrivals alone for the year 2020, from the figures that we shared from the Uganda Bureau of Statistics, shows that we were getting about 1.5 million arrivals for the year 2019. At least those are the figures we have. But now, after the COVID pandemic, the surveys and some of the information we have for the year 2020 shows that the tourist arrivals, for example, dropped from 1.5 million to just slightly over 470,000 people. Now, that is a reduction of about 69.3% from 2019 alone to 2020. And so that means that the country only received a third of the figures of 2019, because the tourist arrivals of 2020, like I had said, dropped. And we have not seen this level of arrivals since the year like 2005. So we dropped to the figures of about 2005. Now, the foreign exchange earnings also, of course, were not spared. So we dropped almost threefold, from $1.6 billion of earnings to about $0.5 billion, which is about 72.7% decline in the tourist foreign exchange earnings. So you can see that the sector, I don't know, I haven't got figures for the other sectors, but I can say it was probably the hardest hit. Now, visitation, the survey that we did as a sector, we looked at the different sub-sectors. For example, we look at hotels, we look at tour operators, we look at other sub-sectors along the value chain. So when we looked at visitation to the different tourist attractions for 2020, as a result of COVID, we had very serious reductions in numbers. We looked at the national parks. For example, for the national parks, the figures declined from 323,000 in 2019 to 101,000 in 2020. These were the numbers that were recorded, were last recorded in 2002. So we dropped to the figures of about 2002. Visitation to source of the Nile, now we just picked out like 3 examples. National parks, source of the Nile. Source of the Nile, the figures dropped from 157,000 in 2019 to 28,000 only in 2020. And for UWEC, which is our Wildlife Education Center, popularly known as the zoo, the figures dropped from 383,000 in 2019 to 67,000, again, which shows a major decline in visitations. So overall, the tourism sites in the country registered about 77% decline in tourism numbers. And for the national parks, of course, this has a very big blow because, as you may know, our agency, Uganda Wildlife Authority, which is responsible for conservation, depends almost 90% of its budget from revenues from tourism, from the entrance fees, from permits, gorilla permits, and so on and so forth. So their budget has been hardly hit. Now we looked at accommodation facilities. These are of course private sector. And the country registered a decline in hotel room occupancy from about 51% to an average of 20%. So our occupancy rates before COVID were at about 51%. But even that 51%, by the way, is not for all parts of the country. You'll find maybe for the urban centers like Kampala you have about 60%, then you have 20%, but on average, but even that dropped to about 20%. And of course, this means that the demand for supplies for agricultural products, for example, to these hotels also does what? Declines. And that's why, if you remember, during the first lockdowns, the prices for food really declined. So if you have been supplying eggs or vegetables to hotels, and hotels are closed for 3 months, so you can only sell these cheaply or make a very big loss. So this, it affects the entire value chain. So the prices of agricultural products and others that supply these accommodation facilities, of course, came down. And of course, this is in addition to the many jobs that were lost. So we also registered a lot of cancellation for bookings. About 90% of the hotel facilities experienced cancellations, and this led to loss of revenue amounting to about $320 million. International meetings, of course, there were no meetings during that period because everything was closed. So we lost a lot of revenue. We had, for example, a conference that was coming up, the UN G77 summit, which was supposed to take place in April 2020. This was cancelled. We were going to get participants from about 136 countries. And this is just one of the many examples. Loss of employment, about 70% of workers in the tourism industry had lost their jobs, and about 91% of the entities had downsized. So others had to lay off, others had to downsize the numbers. Tour operators, our survey showed that 9 in 10 tour operator businesses had registered client cancellations between March 2020 and June 2020. And as a result of these cancellations, tourism revenues in excess of 30 million had been lost in just the 4 months, that is March to June 2020. Now, I have already talked about the loss of tourism revenues to our MDAs. I've talked about Uganda Wildlife Authority. I've talked about UEC. I've talked about, for example, the museum. Our Uganda Museum also collects revenue, but it was shut for those 3 months. Even when it opened up, of course, the numbers went down. So this has not only affected revenues to the private sector, but also revenues to the ministry and its agencies. Yeah. Now, after the first lockdowns, things started coming up again. Normally in the tourism sector, our peak season is usually July to September, October. But even before that, we started seeing some recovery, especially in as far as domestic tourism is concerned. I think because many Ugandans used to love to travel outside the country, now they couldn't travel to Dubai and Mombasa. So we were beginning to see some recovery. So we did another survey around March 2021. But maybe I should start by talking about what did we do as government even before the recovery. What did we do? What did we put in place? First of all, I think we were the first sector to issue standard operating procedures. If you remember, we had a launch of the standard operating procedures, and of course we were working with the government, with the other ministries, Ministry of Health specifically. So the hotels, the restaurants, the bars of course have been closed, but entertainment centers and others, we had to issue and also monitor the use of these SOPs. In addition to that, government came up with a few other measures. For example, taxes. Government waived tax, VAT to be specific. We had already had a waiver for VAT for accommodation facilities in the upcountry, but now this was extended also to the hotels in Kampala and elsewhere. And in addition to that, we were able to negotiate some money, some stimulus package. The sector, driven actually by the private sector but working with us, were able to get 6 million euros from the European Union. But in discussion with government, Minister of Finance guided that this money should be put in UDB, since it's a government bank, and it was the one that was managing stimulus packages. So this money was given to UDB, but UDB had to top it up with its own money so that it can lend to these struggling businesses to be able to recover. We have had a few complaints from the private sector, seeing the conditionalities, the conditions given were stringent. Also, since the money given by the European Union was a grant, they are not satisfied that then it should have been tagged to a loan. But we know a number of them have already benefited, but there have been major complaints which we are trying to address, and still in discussions with government to see if a specific stimulus package can be given for tourism. And then, of course, government intensified promotional campaigns for domestic tourism through our agency, Uganda Tourism Board. You must have heard about the Take on the Pearl. We did a virtual tourism expo, the Pearl of Africa Tourism Expo. And we are also working on other products that can especially encourage Ugandans to visit their own country. We are working on several cultural. There is a lot of demand now and interest in cultural tourism. People come from out. Yes, they will go to the national parks, but they also want to know more about the culture of the people and how they live and the cultural heritage. So we are putting in quite some money in our cultural sites. We are also putting in money in developing and improving our training institutions to be able to get the caliber of staff that are competitive within the region and internationally. So we are upgrading Uganda Hotel and Training Institute in Jinja. We are also upgrading our school in Kasese, the Uganda Wildlife Research and Training Institute, because manpower, skilled manpower is really critical for the sector. Yeah, that's about it. And of course we continue to put in a lot of effort in the conservation activities, and you see what happens when there is a pandemic like this and you have lockdowns and you don't have a lot of people visiting the national parks, for example. Now the poachers also want to take advantage of that. So you find there is an heightened activity in terms of poaching, illegal wildlife trade. So we had to also heighten our strength in that area. We are also working with the Uganda National Roads Authority and CA to see how we can prioritize tourism roads. Tourism infrastructure, basically, roads, aerodromes, and power, working with this. So those are the major areas of focus. You're very right. There is, I think, a mindset that when you talk of a tourist, people think of a foreigner. It's for tourists, yet we can all be tourists within the country. So what we have realized is there are two major things. One is information. We probably hadn't done enough in terms of giving out information. For example, many Ugandans think that it's very expensive to go to the national parks. They do not know that there are rates for the foreign tourists and then rates for Ugandans. And yet it takes about 25,000 for a Ugandan to enter the national park. But they still think that they have to pay a lot of dollars. So we are trying as much as possible to share information now. Uganda Wildlife Authority is now working closely with Uganda Tourism Board to put out as much information. But the campaigns I was also telling you about, we now had to come up with specific campaigns, for example, on digital platforms, because we want to attract especially the youth like you people, so that they do a challenge. For example, UTB would put up a site, pictures of a particular site, and say whoever answers these questions right will win a trip. Now when others see this person enjoying themselves at CP Falls, for example, then they will also want to go. So we are actually going to heighten the marketing and promotion of domestic tourism. But the second aspect to it is I think affordability. When we went out to ask, most people were saying it is still very expensive to travel. The hotels are still very expensive. So we want to keep that discussion with our own hoteliers and other tour operators, see if they can have specific packages that are interesting and affordable, because we have also realized that the interests are not the same. When the Ugandans travel, they want to enjoy, they want loud music, they want to, it's not like the foreigners who want and they just want to be in that wilderness and be in that quiet. For us, maybe we have seen the wilderness for so long. So that has been the problem, coming up with packages that are targeted to the interests of the Ugandan market. So we are celebrating World Tourism Day, joining the rest of the world actually, because it is World Tourism Day on 27th September. We have been doing this for a long time, and in the past we've been rotating the celebrations. So each year we'll do a different region. Last year we were in the east, now we're planning to go north. Maybe the other year we'll go to the east, but of course now because of the pandemic we're not able to celebrate the way we used to. So this is going to be a hybrid, digital and physical. So it will have a small presence, but we want the message to go out there that tourism is recovering. The pandemic, yes, may be here to stay, but we need to learn to live with the new normal. So we have got to continue observing the SOPs, but we can still enjoy the different attractions of Uganda. So I want to encourage Ugandans that Uganda is for them, is for Ugandans to enjoy. It's not just for foreign tourists. There are a lot of affordable things. There are a lot of interesting things to see, not just only the animals. So we want this World Tourism Day to take out that message, and that's why the theme is about inclusive growth. We don't want anybody to be left behind. The mandatory testing hasn't actually started. It's being discussed. It is something that the Ministry of Health has come up with that proposal, and this is backed by science. They think that the rate at which the virus is mutating, we are at the risk of importing another variant which could be more dangerous. So they are proposing that we do mandatory testing. But as of now, as I speak, we are not doing mandatory testing. Every traveler who is coming in with full vaccination and a negative PCR test doesn't get tested. But the mandatory testing, according to what Cabinet discussed last week, is right now they are looking at the facilities at Entebbe to prepare the airport so that it's possible, if we are going to do mandatory testing, to test people at the airport, because before that the tests were being done away from the airport at some beach. But also government has decided if it's going to be done, it will be done by government, not by the private providers who were doing it before. And thirdly, the cost will come down now from $65 to $30, so that it's at least more affordable, but it will also be more convenient. And now for tourists, Cabinet decided, I think you had the President also saying it, will be given a different kind of treatment. So if you're a tourist and you're coming in and you have a tour operator that has prepared your itinerary, they will take your sample, but you will go. You don't have to stay at the airport. So you can go and stay in your hotel and wait for your results. If the results come out positive, of course the Ministry of Health will now take the necessary measures to put you either in a hospital or in isolation. So it hasn't started, but we are working around with all the relevant ministries and agencies to see that it's done. It doesn't cause too much inconvenience to the travelers. It is likely to affect the sector because we have had several reports from the different tour operators especially saying they have received several cancellations. They are saying, and the people who are cancelling are citing the mandatory testing. I think the mandatory testing has not started, but maybe it is the way we have shared the information. So we have had those reports. They have been sharing with us some messages coming from their potential clients saying they cannot come if they are going to have to undergo this mandatory testing. But I think that was also based on the conditions at the airport, because if you're going to take me, I arrive at midnight, you take me to a beach, I sit there for another 4 hours waiting for tests, and yet I have already spent a lot of money on my ticket, on my visa, on my hotel. So it is causing serious concern, and we are still under a lot of pressure from the private sector and tourism to say government should review this decision. So yes, it has affected, because I know there have been a lot of cancellations, but I think at the same time we also have to be mindful of what the scientists are saying. If they're saying we need to guard against importing this, then everything possible that can be done should be done to protect lives. You can only do business when you are alive. Welcome. Thank you very much.